Go.
But all right, let's see here.
We're live.
Screen, window. We'll share that window.
That's good.
Yep. There we go. Everybody can see the slides, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, so this is just kind of like a 10,000-foot overview of different file systems, their features, some what I do, and things of that nature. These can be confusing things. They can be boring. In fact, file systems are boring. They're kind of supposed to be boring. It's a situation where you don't want exciting things happening with your data. These are responsible for uh, the file structure, permissions, access, all of that stuff, keeping your data in place. It's kind of one of the primary functions of a computer. You don't really want them to be breaking. You don't want them to be evolving at too fast of a rate, because they will, you don't want your basically, these have the ability to basically blow away everything you're working on. And as we were talking about, it's a once burned, twice shy thing. If you try a new exotic file system and, kind of trust it where you shouldn't, you can lose data, you can have a malfunction, and you're probably just going to be a bit more hesitant on it. One point I want to drive home throughout all of this is that no file system or RAID, no matter how advanced, is a replacement for a backup. RAID is not a backup. Snapshots are not a backup. They can be used to help with your backup strategy, but you really should have some kind of thing. Every file system, no matter how good it is, no matter what kind of crazy features it's got, is can fail, and you may need to restore from a backup. Backups are important. RAID in particular, I see this a lot. People think if they have a RAID, they don't need a backup. RAID is really about uptime and not having to restore from a backup for a simple disk failure. It's not really in and of itself. It's a backup. You can have a RAID array, and if you delete a file off of it accidentally or overwrite a file accidentally, RAID isn't going to help that. RAID's just there for if a disk fails, you can, in theory, swap it and rebuild without having to take a day or so, lose a day of time to restore from a backup. Linux file system support. It's got a lot of them. Your base ones are your ext 2, 3, and 4. Those were, kind of the classic Linux file systems. Most distributions will run with 4 ext4 as a default. B3FS, which is kind of perpetually half finished. XFX, which is an old SGI FS, which is an old SGI file system and is the default in RHEL. It has some advantages in certain workloads and stuff like that. With like databases and large accessing multiple large files. You've got your old DOS file systems like FAT32. Recently, I'll say recently, it's been a few years now, we've added exFAT, which is the new file location style file system that's used on like SD cards from cameras and stuff when they get over 4 gigs. Various versions and types of CDFS. You've got network file systems like NFS, Netatalk, which is the old Apple File Protocol, SMB, and even floppy support still. And there are other file systems that are supported through Fuse, like SSHFS. There's a ZFS module for Fuse that, for whatever reason, the file system is incompatible or cannot be brought into the kernel. There's an NTFS Fuse module that has some features that the kernel one doesn't, and stuff of that nature. And Fuse, for those who don't know it, stands for file system. Use a user space file system daemon. A few definitions to talk about when we get going here. A striped RAID. So this is your RAID 0. It's also used in RAID 10. A data is written at random access, random across sections of drives. RAID 0 is an example of this. So you've got 2 disks, and you send 1 bit of data to one drive. While it's writing, you send the next bit of data to the next drive. Mirrored RAID. Data is written to each drive. RAID 1 is a good example of this. So this is a simple, you've got 2 or more matched drives. You can actually do a RAID 1 across 3 drives and increase your fault tolerance, unless you're using the wrong topology in B3FS, and then you still have 1 drive fault tolerance. And so basically it's the same bit of data is written to each. Parity RAID, data is striped across multiple drives, and parity data is calculated. How that parity data is stored depends on the level. RAID 4 and 5, the difference between those is that they're both parity RAID, but RAID 4 is all the parity data is stored across one drive. So if you have 3, you need 3 disks for either of these to work, 3 or more disks. And so in RAID 4, your parity data is stored to one of 3 drives. In RAID 5, that parity data is striped across multiple drives. RAID 6, we'll talk about the different RAID levels later, is basically there's 2 parity data bits, so it can survive 2 drive failures simultaneously. Copy on write, it utilizes pointers to the same resource instead of creating a duplicate. Until a change and a write is written, then a copy is made. So this can free up resources. It can also cause problems if you have like a large file that is written to constantly, like a virtual machine image. Copy on write file systems struggle with that because you're constantly making changes, and so it's constantly making a copy of it, which is can chew up. Fedora ran into an issue with that when they moved to B3FS and had to disable copy on write on directories where VMs are stored. Otherwise, you end up burning up your drive, your SSD, because it's constantly writing data. A volume manager. This handles mapping of physical drives into virtual devices. So basically, it's an abstraction layer that allows you to take a bunch of physical drives. You can chain them together, you can do different things with them, but then present them to the OS and create your virtual devices and your volume group, and then your logical volume on top of that, which allows basically a layer of abstraction and a way for you to move around different directories or different structures that's not particularly tied to a disk. A good way to think about this is it's like a virtual partition, whereas a actual partition on a disk is physically written to the disk and is kind of movable. Not really, but this is more of a virtual way of doing it, and you can get snapshots, resize it, online resizing, and things like that. Just a few notes about RAID levels. I never know how much people really know about this, so I stole some pictures from Wikipedia and just made kind of a list here. RAID 0 is just random data written across multiple drives. It's a virtual wood chipper. If one drive fails, everything is lost. RAID 0 is it has 5 priorities. The first one is speed. The second one is speed. The third one is skip 3 and 4. Fifth one is also speed. It's about if you have a lot of caching data or scratch data or something like that, and one drive isn't fast enough to keep up with it, you can do RAID 0. RAID 1, and that's this one down here, does the mirroring where it writes the data to each drive in the array. It's the simplest. It has the quickest rebuild, lowest CPU and RAM load, but higher cost per usable byte. Whereas if you have an RAID 5 array of 4 disks and they're 1 terabytes, you're going to have 3 terabytes of use because you just lose 1 drive worth of capacity. Whereas if you did a 4 drive RAID 1, which is possible now, you would still only have 1 terabyte of useful space because it would be mirroring across all those drives. But Rebuilding it is easy. You don't have to do parity calculations. It's just basically a file copy, more or less. So it's a lot less stressful on the drive. It's a lot less CPU overhead and stuff like that. Um, RAID 5, like I said before, needs 3+ drives. It really shouldn't be used with mechanical drives bigger than 500 gigabyte. There's a likelihood of a second failure doing a rebuild because because RAID 5 stripes the parity data across all the drives. If you have a drive fail, um, and then you replace the drive in the RAID array, you fail it and then you replace it. Um, it's got to go scouring across all the drives in the array to find all those parity bits and calculate the data that should be on that replacement drive. Um, and if you get above about 500 gigabyte, and you could probably go about a terabyte these days, maybe with modern drives. And this is particularly for mechanical drives. This math is a little bit different, probably for SSDs. Um, your likelihood of encountering a bad block or something on one of your other drives while you're doing the rebuild, it you really run it. If you do the math, you really run into that probability getting into 10 or 20%, which isn't high, but it's high enough to make me a little bit skeevy. So I usually go RAID 6 if my base disks are 500 gigabyte or more. That's just kind of an insurance policy. Because if you RAID 5 can tolerate one drive failure, and if you have one drive failed and then another drive fails during a rebuild, well, that's two drives dead, and you've lost your array. And you've got to restore for backup, rebuild the array. RAID 6, this is RAID 5's big brother. It needs 4+ drives, but can survive. Same kind of idea. It's stripe parity, but it can survive two simultaneous drive failures. That's down here because it calculates two parity bits. These little sub P bits here are the parity bits. So you can see that it calculates two parity bits compared to RAID 1, which only calculates one parity bit for a data bit. Um, Again, this is kind of like, I guess, the gold standard. This will run into issues eventually where when drive sizes get bigger and bigger, you start running into a greater and greater potential of finding a bad sector or a bad piece of data on your drive during a rebuild and losing three drives, and then you're hosed. So, um, you know, it's all math. It comes down to mathematics a little bit there. Again, your mileage may vary. You may be 10-20% chance of a second drive failure. Excuse me, a little water here. May not really be too unsettling to you. You might be okay with that. I'm not. So, and to me, that kind of defeats the purpose of a raid. If if a raid array, if your goal is uptime and not having to restore from a backup, um, you're you're really running into a chance of having to do that and losing that uptime and that drive and that data availability at 10 or 20%. RAID 10 is kind of cool. I just put this in there as an example of a hybrid RAID. It's a RAID 0 of RAID 1 or one arrays. It's used for speed. It has the benefits of RAID 0 and RAID 1 without the wood chipper effect. It also has a high cost um, per usable GB. I don't have an image of it here, but basically, um, you've got a pair of drives that are mirrored, and you've got another pair of drives that are mirrored, and then they're put together in a RAID 0. And so you can shoot data to each mirror, and you can so you've got the benefits of the write speed of RAID 0, but you've got the drive redundancy of RAID 1. um, but you lose basically half of your storage. So if you've got four 1 terabyte RAID 1 drives, I'm trying to do this math in my head here, you're going to end up with a 2 terabyte usable, because you're going to have it's going to put that together in a two. It's going to have two 1 terabyte mirrors, and then you're going to have those put together in a 2 terabyte stripe. And so you're going to have 2 terabytes usable. So it has a high cost, but it's got the speed. It's also got the benefits of the RAID 1, where it's a simpler rebuild procedure. There's not a parity calculation. It's less stressful on the drives and it uses less CPU load. Default. So what do Linux distributions use these days? Mostly ext4, XFX or XFX. That's a graphics card maker. XFS on Rail because Rail has to be different. There are some workloads where XFS is a little bit better. I don't really know that until you get to certain scales, it really matters too much. But it is kind of there. I really just think Rail wants to make you feel like you're paying and getting something. If they were just using ext4 like all the other Linuxes, then what are you paying for? Um, no the basic file systems usually have no volume or physical device management built in. You've got to use something like in multi-device or LVM to manage that. They're just kind of old school file systems. Um, they're usually these distributions will layer them with LVM, multi-device, and or Lux for encryption. They're pretty simple to the advantage of these though is they're pretty simple to really think about. You don't have to plan with them too much. You just kind of make fs.ext4, make fs.xfs and go. It's kind of fire and forget. Which leads us to the built-in volume managers. Linux has two that are really used a lot. There's a logical volume management or LVM2. It first came out in Linux 2.2. LVM2 was introduced in 2.6. Is a device and volume manager. It actually can do RAID levels through Linux multi-device. So you can do a mirrored RAID with LVM, and then it just makes calls back to MD admin to create the array and manage the array. Um, it's an abstraction layer, like I said before. It allows the user to move, resize, and add disk to a pool on the fly. So you can have a group of disks, and then you put that into a volume group, and then you can have logical volumes. You've probably seen it like LV root, LV home, and you can resize those on the fly. You can create a new LV. You can also take snapshots and actually you can convert an LV logical volume into an image. So um, where I really used logical volume manager was with a Zen hypervisor, and you could allocate a logical volume to a VM, and then you could snapshot that VM and that logical volume and send it around like an image, and it gave you better speed access than writing to an image file did. It's really it's robust, it's pretty stable. I haven't had probably problems out of LVM as it's been around so long. MD, you use a tool called MD admin. I couldn't find a date when it was first added, but I've been using it for at least 20 years. um, it can be the backbone of logical volume manager for RAID. It supports all sorts of RAID levels: 1, 0, 10, 6, 5, whatever you need. You can do full customization, stripe size, and all of that. That's kind of the benefit if you do create a RAID array through MD admin versus LVM, is that MD admin exposes more of that uh, tweaking to you. And more, I don't like, for example, I don't think you can do a RAID 10 through LVM. You have to do that through MD admin. So you don't get the full MD admin feature set through logical volume management. I have had not a lot of issues out of multi-device and probably more than a decade. It's really robust. You might be asking yourself, if you're an old school person, what about hardware RAID? Hardware RAID is kind of dead these days. Um, there are multiple reasons why. One is cost. Two is it's a single point of failure. So if your RAID card fails, it's got all of the configuration and metadata for the RAID array on it, and so you've just lost your array. Whereas with the OS, if your motherboard fails, the OS RAID, you just replace the motherboard. In fact, with a multi-device RAID or a ZFS RAID or a B3FS RAID, you can take the drives physically. I do this. I've done this several times out of the computer, put it in another computer, and as long as the versions aren't too dissimilar, which, if you're running the same distribution or just like one off, like if you're going from Debian 10 to 11 or Fedora 33 to 35 or something like that, they're close enough that there's not a big feature set change. It imports and just works. Excuse me. So that gives you one less point of failure. The other point is the hardware RAID controllers rely on a firmware on the card that the manufacturer, and it's kind of the Internet of Things problem all over again, right? The manufacturer may or may not keep updating that. And so, say you buy a new hard drive and stick it in there, and that new hard drive firmware doesn't work with your RAID card. You're kind of screwed at that point. It may be a bug, it may be an incompatibility, multi-device and logical volume manager, ZFS, B3FS. They're just all more compatible with the hardware. Constantly being improved upon. What was I going to say with that? I just had a brain, just had a moment there, but so they're all more compatible. They're all being constantly worked on. You could use them with multiple types of drives. Oh, they also expose the drive to the OS. So if you're monitoring your drives, it's easier to get alerts. A lot of these RAID cards and stuff, you have to run a third-party utility. You may or may not get a desktop alert or anything like that. ZFS, B3FS, multi-device, MD admin, you can all set it up to like alert you, to send you an email even to say, hey, you've got a drive on your machine that is acting screwy. We're going to go ahead and flag it. You need to do something about it. So it gives you something that's more exposed to the OS to be able to check on that. That's some things there. RAID cards are dead. Hardware RAID is dead. In fact, if you buy like one of these NAS boxes, like a Synology these days, or what's the other one, QNAP or something, they're all running like a little Linux or a BSD in a chip that uses probably B3FS or ZFS or MD or some mix of the things in there to do their RAID and their drive management instead of having like a hardware controller. So, ZFS is what I use. Despite it not being in the Linux kernel, Greg Cora Hartman, who's one of the primary Linux developers, has said my tolerance for ZFS is pretty non-existent. Sun explicitly did not want their code to work with Linux, so why would we do extra work to get their code to work properly? So, going back a while, when the Sun open sourced ZFS, they put it under a license they designed that made it incompatible with the GPL, and so ZFS cannot be put into the Linux kernel. That being said, there is OpenZFS these days, which is a open source maintenance effort. It's what is based on BSD and the old previous projects of ZFS for Linux, and most distributions have just a simple, and I know on Debian and Debian based ones, you just literally, if you've got the non-free repos installed, which most do, you just do an apt get install ZFS. It gets the tools and everything, and then you're off to build your pools and your whatnots. I would say my advice on ZFS, because there have been kernel changes that have broken the out of tree module, is to run it on a distribution that uses an LTS kernel. Your Debians, your Rockies, your RHEL derivatives, Ubuntu derivatives like Mint, or probably anything that uses an LTS kernel by default that doesn't change the kernel interface with the module too fast. I do run it on Fedora. I've got a Fedora machine, and it seems to be okay. Occasionally, Fedora upgraded the kernel, and ZFS, the OpenZFS folks, have to change something, and they don't quite have it there. But I haven't run into too many problems. But if you want ultimate stability, I'd run it on an LTS kernel. Debuted in 2001, I think, in Solaris, and open sourced in 2005 with Open Solaris. Thank goodness Oracle didn't own Sun at that point, or that never would have happened. In 2013, OpenZFS was founded and kind of consolidated the efforts across the, because there was like ZFS, there was the FreeBSD guys doing it. There was ZFS on Linux and all these other stuff. So this kind of condensed it into a single coordinated effort. License, like I said, is incompatible with the Linux kernel. Has to be built as an out of tree module. It's very on Debian and Red Hat stuff. It's very similar to if you have an NVIDIA card and you install the NVIDIA driver, the old school one. I know there's a new open source one that's got a open source kernel module, but it's very similar to that. It's just got to rebuild the kernel module through DKMS. So it's not that strange. Ubuntu has a ZFS on root setting, I think. Still, it's not as I don't know if they're still running with it or not. They were contributing to OpenZFS, but they've kind of fallen off on that. I don't really run it on my root, but I use it a lot for big disk pools and for actually, strangely enough, because I also have a Mac, I use it as a because there's ZFS on Mac for like swapping drives between Linux and Mac because ZFS has built-in encryption. So, I don't have to think about like Veracrypt or something like that, like a third party thing. I can just, if I have an external drive, I could put ZFS on it. I could read it, write it on my Linux machine. I could plug it into my Mac and read and write it there. So it's kind of replaced exFAT. So I don't have to, and all that stuff for me a little bit. Copy on write, snapshots, even across a network. If you have two machines running ZFS pools, you can send snapshots across your network. Checksumming, this is important because it will protect against bit rot. It basically can take a checksum of your files and then do a scrub. And if you have it configured in a RAID Z1 or a RAID Z, and that's the other thing with ZFS. They, instead of calling it RAID 6 or RAID 5 or whatever, they call it like RAID Z2, RAID Z, but it's the same idea. It's just a funny name because it came in the early thousands when you had to put Z on things to make them sound cool. But it's it does checksuming to protect against bit rot. If you have data sitting on a disk and getting read into memory and putting right back to the disk, you can sometimes, either due to electronics errors or external interference, you can have bit flips, and then that error can totally make your file unreadable, or it can corrupt things. As OpenZFS's checksumming kind of protects against that a little bit. It has compression, so you can save space on your drive, built-in encryption, deduplication, which is also handy. A built-in volume manager, so you can take your physical drives and divide them up into different pools. And the big thing I like about it is, like I said, it's cross-platform across Linux, BSD, Mac OS. There is a Windows version starting. It's alpha. It was forked from the Mac OS port. It kind of works barely, not really. I don't trust it yet, but so it's, in a way, it's kind of replaced FAT for me. This is the 800-pound gorilla in the room that I really like and use. B3FS, I saw this comment on the internet a few years ago, is ZFS reverse engineered by the copyleft cargo cult. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's pretty similar. It is the default in Fedora and open source, and it's part of the Synology hybrid RAID. It debuted in 2009 in Linux 2.6.29. I did find the exact commit for that. And Rail removed support for it in Rail 7. OpenSUSE is really the big contributor to it. Actually, Meta makes big use of B3FS, mainly for the compression. Meta and Facebook has a lot of the same feature set of ZFS, because, like I said, it's ZFS reverse engineered by the copyleft cargo cult, but it has a license that is compatible with the Linux kernel, so you can use it right out of the box. it does support multiple raid levels like ZFS, but raid 5 and 6, in fact, to this day, if you try to make a raid 5 or 6 in B3FS, it'll flash a warning at you to not do that, are considered unstable. I've had issues with raid 1, where it will fail a whole array sometimes. Um, if one drive is missing, which kind of defeats the point of the raid 1. And I don't like their default topology on raid 1. So if you have if you have a 3 or 4 drive raid 1, it still can only, the way that, because of the way it writes metadata, you can still only survive one drive failure, is my understanding. By default, I think you can configure it differently. I think that's a dumb default. Hopefully they change that. The really big advantage of B3FS is that it's like, ZFS was made in an enterprise environment, and it was expecting enterprise hardware, and it was expecting matching drives. It was expecting things to be laid out from the start in the way that you wanted it. You kind of have to plan ahead with ZFS. With B on multiple drives, B3FS was made by a bunch of people in their basement with janky hardware, who maybe wanted to play around and kind of do things on the fly. So it's much more extremely flexible. You can use multiple different size drives. You can change your array topology on the fly. You can do all this other crazy stuff with B3FS that ZFS is just now starting to be able to do. So it's a bit more flexible for janky, kind of like, by the seat of your pants hardware. I just find the stability to be a bit lacking, in my opinion. But I have been running it on my Fedora laptop on a single drive, and it's been fine. I really do like it. I think its main thing, is the compression. I don't like the fact that it doesn't have built-in encryption. With ZFS, you get built-in encryption. B3FS still relies on Lux on the backside, just like EXT4. Um, so you still have to do that. Which, if you do use EXT4, I mean, excuse me, Lux and B3FS, because you have that additional layer, that kind of removes some of the hardware monitoring and stuff capabilities of B3FS, because it's a layer between it and the drive. Oops. So that's kind of a disadvantage. Whereas ZFS, you can have encryption and still have the hardware checking and the checksumming work as well as it should. Um, Hopefully, encryption comes in the future. It's been perpetually half finished. I don't mean to smash on it too hard. It's just like, it feels like Wayland at this point, where it's 12 or 13 years old and it's still not done. Linux had things right. So what is one to do? This is kind of the wrap up thing here. This is kind of my advice, before I open it to questions that I may or may not be able to answer. What in doubt, take the defaults offered by the distribution. Fedora and OpenSUSE use B3FS. They're optimized for that. I always say, when you pick a distribution, you're kind of picking a set of software and a configurations that have been tested together. If you start tweaking the defaults that it's writing that it's doing too much without really knowing why you're doing it, you're going to start to run into trouble, because it's not really tested together in that way. um that's will usually gives you the defaults on most distributions, or some mix of LVM and ext4 and or XFS if you're using RHEL on a single drive. This gives you the flexibility of LVM for the snapshots and the online volume resizing, and the stability and simplicity of ext4 on multiple drives. So if you're building an array of drives, my recommendation is, and what I do, is to use MD, Linux multi-device, or ZFS. They're both pretty bulletproof. I've broken and rebuilt them several times, and they've always come back. MD has the best stability. MD is a bit faster and requires less overhead than both ZFS and LVM. MD has stable parity RAID, unlike B3FS. You can set up a RAID 5, you can set up a RAID 6, and it's not going to nuke your data. The management tools are mature, better documented, and reliable. B3FS changes their management tools here and there, and it's just, if you do it, I don't have to rebuild RAID arrays often or add a disk or something very often, but um, it seems like every time I've done it with B3FS, some fundamental thing has changed. I need to go back and relearn it. ZFS offers protection against bit rot and an ability to correct it when properly set up. MD does not. MD is just a manager. You have to put a file system on top of it. You can run an EXT on top of an MD. MD, you can run XFS on top of MD. In fact, you can put B3FS on top of MD if you don't want to use the B3FS volume manager, but maybe you want to use compression or dedupe on B3FS. You could do an MD array 5, RAID 5 or RAID 6 array, and then put B3FS on top of that. You lose the checksumming because B3FS doesn't have the access to the metadata MD does, but you can kind of mix it. In fact, that's what Synology does. Synology uses their B3FS and their hybrid RAID, but they don't use the volume manager because it's super janky and unstable. And so they use MD and then put B3FS on top of it. That's totally legitimate. That's totally okay to do. I use B3FS on single SSDs or HDDs sometimes. It depends. If I don't, I'll use ext4. But specifically for SSDs, compression will cut down on the amount of data written, extending SSD longevity. SSDs have a lifetime, and I've some of my first SSDs that were like 128 gigs. I've definitely blown them up and and wore down the flash cells. So I being able to uh, compress and save the amount of data written is a definite plus. It has snapshots, subvolumes, and flexibility. Nice thing about snapshots that I was actually talking to Arnold on email, and he said that Linux Mint has the tool Time Shift. By default, it doesn't do snapshots to your does it to your internal drive, so it fills it up. But you can actually do snapshots to an external drive, and I'm not sure. Again, a lot of these features are better managed at the command line with the utilities. I don't like that there aren't so many desktop utilities, excuse me, available to manage these. For example, on Mac OS, they use APFS snapshots for Time Machine, and your average Apple user, probably 5% of them know what a file system is, know what APF snapshots are, maybe 5% of them, but all of them know what Time Machine is. And it's great. It utilizes the snapshot capability of the file system to make a backup. And I really wish that there would be something. Maybe somebody could write it one day to have that functionality for B3FS or something in a GUI, and like an attractive GUI that you can say, back up this drive to this drive using snapshots. But it seems TimeShift doesn't do that. I'm not sure. I haven't really messed with it too much, but that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. I guess I'll open it up to any questions or anything. Does anybody, this help answer any questions, or everyone more confused?
I got a question.
Yeah.
I use Open Media Vault. I've mentioned that a few times in the group, and I have pretty good success with simple message block, common internet file systems, file shares, developing those file shares, and data is easily captured and moved from place to place. But I've tried NFS, Network File System, as a way to create file shares, and I have no success with it. They fail all the time. What is your experience with that?
NFS used to be the gold standard for speed and stuff. NFS is still used on some low level stuff. I would use NFS for I'm not sure who's.
I hate to interrupt, but somebody's awfully noisy.
Yeah, somebody is. Is it Pete? Pete's the only other one unmuted.
I don't know who it is.
Let me mute. Hang on.
Okay, there we go. Okay, NFS is like the that's better. Is the Unix network file system that's been around forever. Some low level stuff, like if you do a netboot server or something, will you mount NFS and then transfer images with that, like a PXE boot. But for actual network shares, yeah, I like CIFS. Protocol has encryption built in. It has more functionality. I actually, on a Mac, you can actually use CIFS for time machine backups. And it has the ability to do that, but you can't do that with NFS. NFS's user permission stuff you have to go back into like NSS to do that, like at the system level. Whereas CIFS, you can kind of do that inside of it itself in the Samba daemon. So yeah, I'm with you. I think CIFS is the better protocol right now. You can also do things like CIFS and Samba support the multipath. So if you have multiple NICs on your desktop and multiple NICs on your server, you can have you can automatically set it up to pile those connections together and get 2 gigabits versus 1 gigabit. So yeah, I definitely think CIFS is the better way to go for day-to-day file sharing. NFS is more for low-level stuff. That makes sense.
That's what I figured. Thank you.
Yep.
Leander,
Sure.
with the kind of the modern hard drives, they're again migrating to SSDs and things like that, and talking about drive size and things like that. Is it still as important to try to run a RAID, or I guess what I'm asking is that going to go the way of the Dodo and the hardware RAID, or is it something that's still going to be as valuable and important?
Are you talking about hardware RAID specifically, or just RAID in general?
No, just RAID in general, like software RAID.
I don't think it's going to go to the way of the Dodo. You're still going to have applications where you want uptime. Looking at like professional workstations, and NAS and file servers and things like that. I think you'll probably see parity RAID kind of get used less, just because you have to scour the drives to rebuild. And we've got 20 terabyte hard drives now. That's a lot of data. You could set up a RAID 1 and with 20 terabyte drives, and I mean, even for me, that's a lot of space, and I produce and keep a lot of crap. And RAID 1's just simpler to manage. It's simpler software to write. It's less failure prone in that way. It's less stress on the drives and everything. I don't see it going away. People are still going to want redundancy and uptime on their drives, especially I see it becoming, like with ZFS and BTRFS, a component, and you're going to see more of these advanced file systems with snapshots and subvolumes and pools, as ZFS calls them, and come along to handle data. I think on your laptop or whatever with a single drive, I don't really see it having any benefit there outside of like I said, BTRFS, maybe not the RAID side, but like the encryption and the dedupe, just to save writing to SSDs, especially if you have a laptop. A lot of them these days have soldered on SSDs, so when you nuke the chips, the laptop's done, unless you're really good at surface mount soldering. So yeah, so I see that, but I don't see RAID going away, because people are still going to want uptime. You don't want to have to restore from a backup unless you have to, and you want to, it's just convenient to be able to just swap out a disk, have it rebuild, and then you're back to work. So,
Thanks.
Yep.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. I am trying to build a NAS with my Raspberry Pi. I've got an 2-inch spinning drive, external, that I'm going to use. Somebody gave it to me. I believe the low-level formatting on it is kaput. Do they still, can you still do a low-level format on our disk drive like we used to do years ago?
For USB drives, I think it really depends on the controller.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the controller. Usually, when I get into USB drives, I recommend the manufacturer probably has some sort of testing software. And if you have a Windows machine kicking around, you can plug it into that and run the WD tools or the Seagate C tools or whatever brand it was. With the USB, it really kind of depends on the controller. Some of them will just show up as a failed USB drive or something like that. So a lot of those drives are just SATA on the internal side, so you can maybe pull it out and stick it in a machine, hopefully without destroying the case. Maybe if it's not glued together. I know some of the more recent ones aren't SATA internally. They've come up with their own kind of connectors because people used to shuck drives because the externals were cheaper for whatever reason. And so if you're building you buy 5 external drives, and it'd be 2/3 the cost of buying the internal ones, and do some just pull them out of the cases. But yeah, it really just depends on the controller. I guess is the answer there. Yep.
Great. That gives me a route to go down. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Hey, Leander. So we were discussing this a bit before you came on. My default has always been to just sort of go with whatever is most supported, sort of whatever the OS sort of suggests by default, figuring that that's going to be the most straightforward, the most supported. And that's what I generally do on my templates at work. Then what I do is if I'm doing something that involves data I care about or data that where performance is more key, I'll then use that file system for the mounted file system for varlib, MySQL, or wherever I'm doing my Elasticsearch. And so those are really the two use cases where I've given the most thought. MySQL, where performance is more of a concern, or Elasticsearch. And I think I'm not looking at my stuff right now. I think I ended up with pretty much ext4 with stuff turned off as those choices. Again, I'm not looking for fanciness with recovery or anything like that. My recovery is going to be handled a layer up in the virtual server realm.
Right.
But I'm just curious, in those particular use cases, if you have any particular insight.
Not really. On a virtual machine, I think you're really more hamstrung by the virtual layer than you are the file system on the disk. I would, yeah, I think part of the logic of rel switching to XFS was database performance. At work, I've really not seen much difference between that and any kind of tweaks you can do the ext4. It may be not at our scale, right? Maybe people who are doing like Twitter database or Facebook database, that makes some kind of difference. But I really, if it's working and you're getting the throughput that you need, I don't really have any recommendations there. Usually, when I get bottlenecked on a database, we throw hardware at it. So we're like, okay, we need to get faster disks or something in here. Usually, the file system tweaks aren't really going to help there, but you could change your block in your and your size, and like I said, cut off some of the features. You probably don't want to do, I would stay away from Btref, anything with compression or dedupe, extra overhead, right? Cut off all of that. But I don't really have any particular recommendations on that use case now.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Leander?
Yeah.
Do you, is there any idea? I know ext4 has been around 15 years. Is there any is there going to be a successor to it?
Probably one day. B3FS was supposed to be the successor to it,
Yeah.
I think. But B3FS is still not done yet. So eventually, yes. I don't really know the timetable on that, but yeah, I would see, yeah.
Yeah, Leander, I was going to mention, you were talking about databases. Typically with relational database management systems, they're slower and less able to access data. If you go to a graphical user database like MongoDB or Neo4j or something like that, it's a lot faster. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, your key value, that's part of the. Yes, yeah, those are a lot faster. The key value pair store types, the no SQL kind of things. Yeah,
Right.
right. But usually you have to still back those with a relational database. It's just another kind of abstraction layer. I like the humorous graph someone made of like their application of like it all comes back down to a real database in the backside somewhere. But but I think those are probably better used as a front end for a relational database.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions?
No question. Just don't use MongoDB. It's not a good database.
No, I use Neo4j, not Mongo.
all my experiences with Redis, so I have nothing to offer there outside of Redis has worked for me.
Mongo's a lot better than it used to be, but it's not. Talk about data loss. It's not even good at keeping data, or at least it wasn't in my experience.
It's another wood chipper, huh?
Yeah. Well, they a bunch of JavaScript developers didn't know how to make a database, and it definitely showed over the years. And in a lot of benchmarks, Postgres, in my experience, Postgres is as fast or faster as a document JSON database than Mongo, and comparable to Redis or something like that.
Yeah, I use one of the applications I wrote at work was we have to keep track of, for DMCA purposes, translations across a NAT for our students, and I'm feeding in thousands of connections a second into a Postgre database that we keep for 14 days or whatever. In case we get a DMCA notice, we can associate an IP address with a connection on the outside, and Postgre has been just phenomenal there, and on pretty standard hardware. It's not anything special. So yeah, Postgre is probably the way to go. MySQL definitely is, I would say, more user friendly. Like if you're just kind of screwing around with something, but Postgre is definitely better, I feel like, in production. So
yeah.
Stitch just gets, look, man. It's not my thing. It's if we want to get federal funding, we have to do these things. I don't like it either, but
you just got to make sure that data gets corrupted at the right times.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully, it's really, we still have to keep it for these requirements for whatever, but I haven't seen many DMCA violation letters, and we get like 2 a year. We used to get like 5 a day. I guess streaming services, they've quit trying to. Kids still torrent, we still see the traffic coming across. It's still happening, but I guess they aren't really clamping down on it like they used to. So
there's only a certain number of people who use torrent now. It's just not how stuff gets stolen, and I don't think folks really have a way of. I mean, for one, if you're streaming, you're not sharing, right?
Right.
Not, at least not mostly. I mean, sometimes there is a peer-to-peer component of stuff like that, but it's a lot less straightforward than a torrent. Yeah, and I've not experienced. Same in our environment. We used to get DMCA on a regular basis, and we had no way to track it, no real concern, because our notion is if you're in the hospital pirating something for, to make your stay a little more pleasurable, I'm okay with that. I don't care. And until someone strongly comes, to us and say you have to put a stop to it, which has not happened, then we're not going to care. It's like what patient satisfaction comes first, above pretty much everything else. And it was rare when it was happening, and it really just doesn't happen anymore because the move of the average person to the streaming services, it's just more convenient to go to your whatever is, you can tell I'm dated, whatever is the current crock of it, and then just do that.
Yeah, we had kind of the same tact for years. It's just kind of like, well, whatever. But there is some kind of Department of Education thing where we had to make some sort of minimal effort, or they would take funding away. I mean, the MPAA, and the RIA twisted the federal government. And, since we could get into government philosophy about how the government and the corporate entities are basically one thing at this point, but that's why we had to start doing something.
Just store that data in Mongo on Riser or
There
something.
you go. Yeah. Oh, sorry, lost it. Yeah. So, but it's sad. I don't like doing it. But yeah. So
I was wondering why did you do a whole application and why not just like store the logs and grep through them if you need them?
Searchability for normies. Basically, we had we've got support desk people that get the DMCA notices, and it just makes it easier for them to go to a web page and say this is the external IP and the port that was reported, and it queries the database instead of having to put a ticket to me and I have to go grep a log.
Oh, I got you.
Yep.
Or just dump them in Elasticsearch.
Yeah. Well, this was before we made this. Well, gosh, I think Elk was very baby back there, if it existed at all back in like the early 20. When did Elk come along?
Elk was like 2010-ish was when it started getting popular.
Okay. Yeah, this may have been around that same time. It may not have been on our radar yet or something. It's been well over a decade. We've kind of tweaked it and rewrote portions of it since then, but it's been around because that thing came down in the late thousands, I want to say. But yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I never liked it, but it is pretty effective to just dump a bunch of stuff in Elasticsearch and have people go crazy. Like
it
solved a lot of business problems for me that I didn't want to solve with something hand coded.
Yeah, I've had my only problem with the Elk stuff and the Elasticsearch stuff is it's a resource pig. Two, it's like they really want you to pay for it, so like it seems like the free version is almost purposely obfuscated to a bit, and it's like a freaking house of cards. Like I don't think I've ever updated an Elk stack setup and not had issues. So
well, if you can afford it now, there's services galore that do it without having to manage anything. But they all cost money, right?
Right.
And yeah, the free stuff, and Amazon's got their own competing version now. Like I don't know if you remember, like they Amazon like made the Elasticsearch like service, and they didn't contribute upstream like they should according to the license. So that's why like Elasticsearch and all those places started doing stuff, and now Amazon's got a new open source version that it's a weird fight.
I don't really know. I don't really do much with Elk. We have another group. I was supposed to, but then they had to import data from the feds or something for security, and I didn't have the clearance for that, so I didn't get to finish that. So yeah, I was like, they're like, you can go through this process, and I'm like, I am not. Nope. So anyway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that was I don't ask Kevin about that. Whenever he gets back. So. I guess any other questions?
Alrighty. Well, thanks, Leander, for that presentation. That was very informative.
Yep, great presentation.
Yeah, who knew Hardware Raid was dead? I didn't. Maybe you guys did. I had no idea.
It's, I mean, if you look at a lot of the disc shelves and stuff from, yeah, they're just running like, gosh, the name of it, NetApp and what all these other companies that they're just running some kind of little piece of Linux or BSD running one of these software solutions behind it. The hardware RAID that's like in your desktop and stuff is just software BIOS RAID, which doesn't really work that well anyway. So yeah, I mean, there's, the hardware RAID's good and dead, I think so.
Yeah, I'm running a 4 terabyte RAID 1, and that's good enough for me. Doing a great job.
It's just, I think it's just the CPU resources have gotten so cheap that, it used to be when you got a 300 megahertz, Pentium 2 or whatever, the hardware RAID controller did offload some load, but we've got so many the sub instructions and whatever else on these CPUs these days that it's just it's almost free. And you've got like 16 cores in your average machine, so or well, that's 4 8 16 something like that, so it's kind of the performance benefit is really gone away, and it's just become a liability because that RAID card can go dead, that RAID card cannot be getting updated. That's another thing, drive incompatibilities. They've got these shingle magnetic hard drives and the consumer drives now, which work with some RAID subsystems, but not another. So, and really don't work with the cards too well. So it's, it's kind of dead in a lot of ways. So,
I don't think a lot of people understand or realize just how much data is involved in 1 terabyte. And a good way to compare that, an analogy, is if you take a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper and you type single space and completely cover the front and back of every page with data, and then you stack that page by page on top of each other, 1 terabyte would be 35 miles high. And so that's a lot of data. And then you figure 20 terabyte hard drive. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we've and we're storing less and less, it seems, like the average person. The average person is storing most of their stuff in the cloud. Folks like us maybe are a little bit different, but like the resolutions have sort of maxed out what we could actually see, so it's not like images are getting that much larger. Again, folks like Leander may have a different experience, but the normies amongst us don't have to deal with that. So so video, all that is kind of maxed out for anything we might store. But and again, who's storing things? Like I used to have a collection of like MP3s, but now I have Spotify. I used to have a collection of movies, kind of, sort of, or at least maybe I would download them here and there. And now, they're just on streaming services. So there's not a lot of data that I have to manage in my personal life anymore. Excuse me, Leander, what's going on for you personally this week?
Work's kicking back up. We were setting up a 3-node HPC cluster me and Jeff were this past week, and last couple of weeks, ordered 3 64 core Epic machines from HP Enterprise, and 2 out of 3 were dead on arrival. And we're on motherboard number 3 on one of them, and 3 RAM things dead. Our data center guy is really anti AMD, and he's like, "Oh, this is because we got those AMD CPUs." And I was like, no, it's because we went with the cheapest, state stuff. You go with the cheapest bidder, which is HP. So maybe they were angry for us using non-HP toner on our printers or something. Anyway, but we've been struggling with that, but we got it mostly. We're starting to get it mostly under control. We're trying to get a grant for one of the NVIDIA A100 cards. For our one of our math department wants it, and one of our biologists wants to use it too. So that's been work. Been putting in a lot of extra hours for that, trying to get that done on the research computing side. Personally, I've been messing around. I switched. Been doing some testing with Darktable stuff, and I basically GCC 13 is a hot mess, and I basically just completely wholesale switched over to LLVM for my compiling needs, and I'm having far less issues. So I don't know if anyone else does any kind of tweaking or messing or anything with that kind of stuff, but yeah, GCC 13 seems to be a mess, and their mailing list is full of people going, "What? Why is it doing this? Why is it?" So it's not just me. I'm not the only idiot in any case. I always feel better when I'm not the only idiot with stupid questions. So
What happened? Or like what
so my issues so far seem to be with casting and things that were previously now granted, this is the eternal problem of someone else's code. This is 4 gigabytes. Darktable is 4 gigabytes of C code going back to 2009. So a lot of it is, I'm kind of seeing this error and kind of trying to figure out what, but a lot of it seems to be with casting and certain calls it's not liking anymore that were fine in GCC 12 and didn't throw warnings or anything. And there's similar issues if you go look at the mailing list from people like that. Like I said, I'm not a real heavy duty developer, but these days, but yeah, that seems to be the issue.
was the switch over straightforward?
I
just use whatever compiler the project likes.
Yeah,
I didn't think about it.
I didn't. It was for me. I ran into issues when I went from Fedora 37 to 38 because 37 was GCC 12, 38. They moved to GCC 13, and that's when I started running into problems. And I started rewriting my build scripts to use LLVM, and it solved all the problems. So I was like, oh, okay, well, should I go and talking to the project maintainers is like, do you want to start? Should we start squashing all these GCC bugs, or do we just go? We're using LLVM now, but yeah, that's yeah.
Was it painless though? I mean, like just switching to LLVM?
Yeah. Basically, you export, you export your CC and your CCXX variables to point to CLang and CLang++, and then you do your CMake, and then you do your make painless.
Wow.
Pretty painless. Yep.
I didn't know it was like a drop-in.
Pretty drop-in, yeah. In my experience, your mileage may vary. I'm also an idiot, so anyway. But
No.
but
LLVM is the future. I've been playing around with that Mojo, like the Python superset that's like 1,000,000 times faster, and I'm really experienced with Python, and like, goddamn, it's 1,000,000 times faster, like with no effort at all. Just write the same Python code, and it's way faster. It's real.
It's been I've noticed. I think LLVM does some other. I'm kind of looking at it. It has some ability to do some compile time optimizations. That's I don't know. I need to start looking into that more. But yeah, as far as a drop-in replacement, it was changed to environment variables, CMake and make, and works. So
yeah, it's all the optimizations that was real interesting. I think that's why a lot of the heavy-duty compiler guys like it, because you can cross-compile between languages, and then they have optimizations they can do because they have the full AST of the, not just whatever kind of weird GCC representation. They have the full representation of the. They optimize their byte code rather than the C code.
Yeah.
Or their like little, what do they call them, units or atoms?
Yeah.
They can optimize those, and then for every language.
Wow.
It's really, what a cool project. I didn't know it was that simple though. You could just switch them out.
One of the Darktable contributors, Roman Libdev, he's one of the LLVM maintainers. I go back and forth with him a lot, and I've been kind of trying to learn from him. But yeah. So, yeah. Anyway,
cool.
So, but yeah, that's kind of been it. I did get my bees set up. Oh, that was the other thing. I need to come get your bee stuff or talk to you about the bee stuff because I have Brent. We ordered some bees from Georgia. USPS lost a tractor trailer full of bees for a week, and about 2/3 of them died en route. So I'm in the middle of an insurance claim with them. The queen survived, so it seems that they're doing okay. But our bees are actually doing pretty well this year, outside of USPS trying to murder them. But anyway, the mail service isn't what it used to be. That's for sure. It seemed to be even 5 years ago was far more reliable. I don't know what's going on, but yeah. But I need to come down. I might be able to come down there tomorrow or this week sometime. I'll get up with you on that. My work is slowing down with the cat suddenly passing away. That kind of threw a wrench into my whole mood and didn't feel like dealing with much. So, but I need to get on that. So, yeah, that's kind of been it. Yeah, if you need Bitcoin mined, I guess, or whatever the new, I've got 3 idle HPC machines right now. Whatever the new crypto thing is, I don't know, but
We're training LLV. We're training large language models now.
so okay, there we go. Yeah, so
new compute hungry thing to do.
That's what I told one of my researchers. I was like, we can run probably a Chat GPT clone locally on this thing, and your kids can cheat on their homework that much easier. So
yeah.
So
Llama. Oh, there's a lot of money in that, man. People are excited. I've been going to all those networking events around town, for developers and stuff, and people are real hyped up about the LLM stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah, everyone's talking about it. I just figure that what will typically happen is the C-suite executives will decide they can. It's just like what DevOps happened. They decided they could fire all their admins and the developers could do all the work, and they'll probably figure they could fire half their developers now. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, I didn't like Copilot because it wasn't really helpful to me. But GPT-4 is like way better at programming, but it still doesn't solve. It's like 60. The questions I ask it, and maybe I ask different questions to other people, but it's like only gets it 60% of the time. Does it answer correctly or in a reasonable way, like through an iteration? So I don't think it's ready for prime time yet. But it is really neat how well it does.
Man, it's just it for me. It's like the technology itself doesn't concern me. What people are going to do with the technology more concerns me. So
yeah.
Yep.
I just finished watching Mrs. Davis. Has anybody watched that? Yeah, it's all about scary the scary information technology stuff.
AI.
Well, the business leaders are funny because some people are like gung ho and are not risk averse at all. I saw a presentation by somebody who had like just embedded ChatGPT right in their website, and I was just like, I would be too. I would never do that. And actually, one of the guys at the plate giving a talk, one of the guys that I was talking a little group with, he had already tried it and he had run out of GPT-4 credits because there's like credits to use it, And but he like went to this guy's website and like just tricked his ChatGPT to do the thing he wanted to do. So using that guy's credits, like not even trying, like there was no hacking involved. Just more like he went to the GPT guy, the agent on that guy's website and used his money to basically answer a GPT question.
Well, in Mrs. Davis, the scary IT was developed as a customer service app for Buffalo Wild Wings.
Nice.
Well, that's actually happening. There was that. It was one of those suicide prevention hotlines or mental health crisis. Yeah, the workers tried to unionize and they decided to let them go. This is real. This isn't a TV show. Decided to let them go and they're going to try to replace them with a large language model bot or something.
Yeah, the anorexic. The anorexic hotline.
Yeah,
they got rid of all their workers who are unionizing, and they're going to get I don't know.
Like I said, I'm not so worried about the technology itself. I'm worried about the C-suite executives and how they're going to use it. So anyway,
I'm worried about the weaponization of it.
Yeah.
And that's what worries me.
Well, the business people are all hyped up about it. But I feel like we're at the beginning of the hype cycle, right? Like they're going to start realizing where the weaknesses are, I think, pretty quickly.
All right, Alex, what do you got going on this month? Well, in the last several months, because we haven't seen you in a while.
Oh yeah, I quit my job in January, so I've been unemployed, and I've been working on that SSI stuff, and then also these large language models. I've been trying to get into that to train my own GPT, like we were talking, like Leander was talking about. So it's been really fun to play with that, and then work on SSI stuff. I'm going to all these like local networking developer groups, like not this one, but other ones. and just trying to come up with a business idea for these LLMs or work on this mobile app I'm working on. So that's what I'm doing. And I got to talk. I'm giving a talk on LangChain, not this week, but next week at the Google Developer Group. If you guys want to come, it's on Meetup. But that's what I'm doing.
Cool. Dan, what you got going on?
I don't have a lot this month. It's been slow. I've been dealing mainly with health issues with my wife, and surgeries and stuff. But one of the things I looked at doing, I posted it on our group as well, is I've completely replaced sudo now on my main system with doas. And if you're not familiar with that, I'm running AV Linux MX Edition, and I kept getting warning messages popping up on me all the time when I was using sudo saying sudo is being deprecated. You might want to go to doas. And so I looked into it, and doas is much smaller than sudo is. Sudo is like 20 megabytes in size. And it's got so many options that we never use, never use, and doas does not. And so what I did was it was easy to installed it, and then I disabled. I didn't uninstall sudo. You don't want to do that. But I disabled sudo using sudo, and so that my username and root cannot use sudo. And then I use doas. It forces me to use doas. Works really well. I mean, I haven't had any issues with it. It just clicks right along, does everything that sudo used to do. It's just not as vulnerable because it doesn't have a footprint as large as sudo does. So I see doas, and there's another one called Nala. I see doas eventually replacing sudo down the road. You know how Linux is, though. Everything's slow in transitioning. Deprecation in the world of Linux is like 20 years. So, but eventually I think it will replace it. That's about all I got going on.
Maybe we'll add it to Wayland and B3FS as the perpetually half-finished thing. So
Yeah.
Yeah, which group is working on it?
What doas? I don't know. I really don't
I
know.
think doas comes from the BSD world, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
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 I think it's from free or net or not
It's
net.
free
Open.
BSD. It's
Yeah.
free BSD. It's been
Yeah.
used by BSD for a long time. When you said who's running the program, I didn't even think of BSD for some reason.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Mhm.
Gene, what do you got going on this month?
Well, Xubuntu broke my computer, so I'm a little bit mad at that. I've got an old Dell Latitude 6530, and I routinely do updates. And the last update that I did, it will get so far booting up, and then it just stops. There's some probably Brent said, and I think it's probably right, something probably in the kernel. So I had to. I did go back and reinstall and install a backup, and as soon as I did it, it went to update, and it did the same thing again. And I said, "Oh dear, I must have hardware problems." So I checked my hardware out and everything, and it's okay. So evidently in the something in the update. So I'm just kind of going to wait it out, and I'm not really. I don't really get far enough when I go back to try to boot into an older kernel. I just I get the root screen, and then I'm really not good at calling what I need to call to get the older kernel to boot. So I'm just I'm running a stripped down version with and I tried to turn off updates. So I go into the software and updates screen and say don't update, but they still give me messages. Updates are available, you know. So it's like, why can't, when you turn it off, why is it not off? Is what one thing I'm wondering. But I'm sure at some point they'll either get some messages or they'll figure out that they've boogered some computers and they'll uncheck whatever box they check to kill my computer. So other than that, I've been cutting wood for the winter, and I have my 4-wheel drive wheelbarrow full of wood right now, and just other than that, just hanging out. So enjoying this kind of unseasonably cool weather we've been having. I don't know if it's been as cool over in Boone as it has been here, but we've had some nice cool evenings and cool mornings and all that. So it's been wonderful.
Gene,
Yes.
you've got a fairly old laptop, a Dell Latitude
Yeah.
6000 series. I have one as well. It's like 15 years old.
Yeah.
Are you sure you're not having a BIOS issue where you need to reflash the BIOS if you're having boot up problems?
I am not sure about that, Dan. That's a good idea. I might have a look at that. When I got this is a secondhand computer, and when I got it, I did at that point flash the BIOS, but I've had it for a couple of years, so I wouldn't think it was that. But then
I've had that problem. That's why I asked.
yeah, well, it could be then, since
Yeah.
you've had experience with it.
Yep.
I'll try that.
Okay.
I normally don't try to flash the BIOS unless I absolutely have to. But
Yeah.
sometimes you do absolutely have to.
All right. Thanks, Gene. Who's next on my list here? Pete, what you got going on? You're on mute, Pete.
Yeah, I got up here about a week and a half ago from Florida, and I've been cold ever since I got here. It's a pretty nice day today. I think it's up to 7.
That's a good thing, Pete. That's a good thing.
It is. I guess so. It's a lot warmer down in Florida. Haven't been doing much computer-wise with getting the house, squared away down there so I could come up here, getting this one opened up and the well up and running and all that good stuff. The hot water tank filled and heating up. My grandson is graduating from high school, and I'm going up to Vermont on Monday. And he is a computer nerd. He's been running the robotics club at the high school. He's been in it since he was in middle school. And this year, they couldn't get a teacher to do it. It's an after hours program. So they said they'd pay him $1,500 if he would run it. He said,
Whoa.
Sure. So he's been running that. And right away, he had to prepare a grant request to get funding so they could buy more hardware to build their robots with. And they competed in the statewide tournament. I think they came in like second or third. Can't remember. Anyway, so he's very computer literate. And at the same time he was doing his last year in high school, they have a deal where he could do his first year in college at the same time. So he did both. And he decided he doesn't like college and he's not going to continue with college. And he's going to go get a job that pays him a lot of money and get his own place so he can move out of his mom's house and do things the way he wants to do it. Well, we'll see how all that works. But
Pete, is he in a STEM school?
no, he's in the Montpelier High School and the Vermont Community College.
Oh, okay.
It's not a STEM school. No.
All right.
So that's what's occupying my time. One thing I want to comment on, I think it was this past week on NPR, they had an interview with the guy that just quit Google that developed this Chat GPT thing.
I saw
And
it.
he described originally he was trying to figure out how human brains work. And he tried to come up with a computer model, but it was based on just like a listing of facts, how the brain has seen things in the past. And that didn't work. They worked on that for, I don't know, a few years. But then he came up with a new idea that our brain is really set up like a hologram. Like when however that database is set up to generate holograms, it's somehow spatially distributed, and you can combine all those things to come up with what you want to display. And they worked on that, and they got absolutely nowhere with that. And they stopped and went back to the other model. In the last 5 years, the power of computers has increased so much that they've gone back to the holographic model of the brain, and they are making progress. And that's what they're making progress so rapidly. That's what scared them about. I'm trying to remember how he phrased it. Afraid that we're going to become extinct, that this new computer model with the supercomputers is going to replace what humans do in whatever field, answering phones, giving advice. And he's really, really concerned about that. And that was the first explanation that really made it make sense in my mind. Why is everybody talking about all this Chat GPT stuff? It's because the new holographic model and the new computers are really starting to get things done real fast. I'm sure you can stream that on NPR.
Well, wasn't there something about quantum computing in there too? Is that?
I don't think there was. I don't remember that.
I heard something else that also threw quantum computing into the mix. Which,
really? Because that's supposed to be.
To understand.
Yeah, that's supposed to be real fast, quantum computing. That would tie in with it. I mean, it just, our brains are not going to be able to keep up.
Well, the thing that scares me, like I said, Pete, is there's a lot of talk at the government level about turning over AI to control preemptive strikes and counter strikes and all with nuclear weapons. And boy, if we do that, we're in trouble.
We're up the creek. Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
At least twice that we know of, a human being has overridden the rules, has not followed orders, and kept us from a nuclear retaliation for something that didn't actually happen.
Last time it was the Russian.
Yeah, there's a Russian fellow who we probably owe all our lives to for his good common sense. That if we're gonna attack with everything. We're not just gonna send a handful of missiles over or a single missile. So yeah, he's like, no, this doesn't make sense. So he basically broke the rules and did not follow through with.
They're really concerned. They're really concerned about deep fakes with this new computer and holographic.
Well, you say the extinction of the human race like it's a bad thing.
It's only a bad thing for the humans.
The Russians have a program called Dead Hand. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the Americans have an equivalent program. And does anybody know what Dead Hand is?
No.
Okay.
Is that the notion of like a fail-safe?
Yeah, pretty much. What it is if we, probably us rather than the Chinese, attack the Russians in a preemptive strike, then Dead Hand will be able to counterstrike even if all systems are gone and all Russians are dead. it'll be able
Wow.
to launch its attack against whoever the attacker was.
Like a fail safe.
It's a fail.
Dead man switch.
Wow.
Unfortunately, it looks like we lost Santiago. Sorry, Pete, were you done?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He had to go. Rusty, what you got going on?
Hey, what have I got going on? Well, let's see. I'm doing a patio. I'm doing an exterior stairway that is based on building the frame in a floating in position, and then building the foundation connectors under it, which are like little poured pylons of concrete. Getting into some thoughts on tilt up, cast in place, and tilt up wall systems versus multi-layer sandwich wall systems that are done upright and in place. That requires placing concrete on the skeleton that is pre-assembled. Things like that are on my mind, but in the midst of all these busy work things, I've got a friend taking down a head rebuild on an older vehicle that fortunately we found a good local machine shop. So in the midst of that, a few computer projects that are just trying to save me from some dysfunction or another. And later on in the week, I want to post to the list to find out what keystrokes folks have that restart processes or basically get a frozen application out of a out of a freeze. And this has to do with zombies that occasionally afflict my Vivaldi browser. And I either have to just shut down processes outside of Vivaldi, or quickly enough, because the mouse freezes up too and isn't allowed to participate. You either have to find the guilty tab and kill it, or just kill the top process and do that before zombies start proliferating. So this has given me an interest in keystrokes that get you around a logjam when you cannot use your graphical interface because either X Windows is occupied along with browser. I just don't even know what level the freezes are occurring. So I'm interested to hear what others have done in situations that are recurring. When you don't know just a simple web page is so many processes that are called, some of which are video intensive. If you haven't been able to block those, and when I've had the interesting experience of also seeing proliferated failure across identical tabs that have been preloaded with the same criteria. This, if some may recall, a post that I did about preloading tabs for finance.yahoo and presenting those web pages with a list of tabs to be loaded, and Dan helped out in getting that installed. But I found an interesting phenomenon where I had a whole bank of such tabs operating under Vivaldi, and they all failed in unison. They would not render a key graph that I wanted rendered. And I found out that the reason why none of these were rendering is they all were apparently loading a necessary file from the what do you call it? Not the stash, but the cache. Yes, the cache being loaded. Apparently, they were all dipping into cache to get the same file, and this made them unable to render a portion of the web page in each tab. And by just I did a deletion of cache that was time, a time space, and I went back 4 weeks, no change. Finally, I had to go back and eliminate the whole cache to find, because I didn't know where the guilty file was. And sure enough, all of these tabs all start working again because they now have a functional file for that part of their execution. So forgive me for rambling through everything here, but it's just so interesting how so many application processes are interacting. And when you get frozen, you're not sure what tool to use to kill them. And I'm sort of interested in key, like I've used a command Control-Alt-1, and sometimes it seems to give immediate benefit if I feel that freeze up, which is to kill the front process. And there's I do not know of a way to open a terminal that is independent of the in other words, if I can't get to a terminal through a graphical as a graphical application, then I'm stuck with no terminal. And so that's another command I'm interested in, is how to get to a terminal that I can use to restart top if I have a frozen system. So anyway, I'm going to post on this later in the week to see if folks have for folks that are running smoothly, there may not be a need for such a tool, but I'm kind of wanting to get my set of tools replenished for some of these, I guess you might say, lower level restarts.
Rusty, what leaps to mind is opening another workspace.
Yeah, actually, that's on my list. I have lost track of where workspace is on. I'm using Kubuntu Mint derivative, and I used to know where workspace was on the toolbar. It was there, and so I'm kind of a victim of using graphical interface. And I don't know how to get to another workspace anymore in Kubuntu.
Rusty, with the thing with the terminal issue you talked about, there's a way to get to a non-pseudo terminal that's not graphically connected. And the way to do that is, I believe, Control-Alt F1 through F5 or F6. It will take you out to the terminal.
I have that on my written list. Control-Alt F1 says to open a terminal for for anything like PS or top that you might want to run.
Right.
but I don't believe that has been working when I've had these freeze ups in Kubuntu.
Well, you
So,
mean you can't launch each top from there, or what?
well, I haven't been able to see a terminal come alive.
Okay.
And I was thinking the Control Alt F1 might be just calling another workspace functionally. But if it is creating another workspace, I'm not seeing it pop up on my monitor. If maybe it's off screen or.
It's not a workspace. It's a non-sudo terminal.
Huh.
Forget what the terminology is for it. It's got a name, but it's unlike your regular terminals that you have in your operating system.
Yes.
Which are pseudo terminals. Okay, PS1,
Yeah.
2, whatever. It's a non-sudo. It's if you use that, you'll go around your window manager. So that's usually what happens with freeze ups. Is your window manager freezes up.
Yeah. Another question here, well, I actually have a command up here that says, in most systems, Control Alt backspace kills the X11 graphic and restarts it. Are there any consequences to killing X11? I have killed it, and it seems to be something that the application can actually stay alive, but it's not entirely clear to me when X11 restarts whether or not you're just going to be faced with like a new login and restarting all your applications.
I don't think so. I think it's just going to start your window manager, your server, X11 server.
And so
shuts it down and restarts it.
Right, and it should go out and grab all the operating applications that are already underway.
Yeah, it should.
Yeah, and just it should render them without any. Well, it's quite interesting how all these processes are going on in parallel, and one or another, when a freeze occurs, it's hard to know what level, what part of a team is overwhelmed. It's kind of a team effort, and it's all in parallel. But then every now and then, one is waiting on the other. So anyway, that's where I am. Just trying to learn what's actually going on. It's amazing. You become comfortable with technology in your life, and then you realize you just don't really know what's going on, which is a little message about being comfortable with nuclear weapons, being comfortable with military chain of command. We're really in a tight spot in this world. As an hour after this, at 3:00 this afternoon, I'm going to a talk that's about nuclear weapons and some of these issues that were just previously discussed in Asheville. So
where is that?
3:00. The meeting room that's in the Battery Park, the old Battery Park Hotel. I think it's up in the top floor.
Interesting.
Well, who's putting that on?
I do not. I mean, the person's name is Bruce Gagnon, Gagnon. I have never heard him speak, but I thought it'd be interesting to hear him in person.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Rusty. That actually does sound like something that could be a topic for a meeting. Is sort of how to recover from X, Y, and Z. Probably something if we set up a virtual server and poked around with it and tried to force various failures, but that's going to take some thinking and some thought. And I don't know if I'm the right guy for that, but we can maybe figure something out along those lines, because that's certainly something where I've never been the master of. Because like you know, I often have to just resort to the 7-second press if something goes horribly wrong. Usually I don't have a lot going on in my machine where I have to care too much that I'm disrupting everything. But yeah, that's a good idea. Before we run out of time, Larry, what you got going on?
What
It sounds
in
like
the-
Larry has gone chipmunk.
what?
I I hope
What?
I hope that's not a medical condition. I hope that's a technical thing.
Take a pill, Larry.
But yeah, that's yeah. I don't know how to recover from that one either. So I think we're gonna have to move on because that is not, unfortunately, intelligible. Um, so yeah, that's still not working. I'm gonna have to mute you there because that's
Mute Larry,
that's
please.
a little too entertaining. I was wondering where that sped up feedback was coming from, but now I guess we know. So one thing that came up in the midst of things when someone mentioned a sort of biological, like supercomputing processing and so forth, I realized that my sister has become sort of a Linux person because she is actually has a doctorate in biology and does research, and so she needs to do like whatever she does with proteins and so forth with like a bunch of graphics cards, and she does that in Linux. And that made me wonder, and it's something that popped up because I learned that one of my coworkers is also into Linux, and we may actually try to get him onto our systems team so all the Linux support isn't just me, assuming he's competent, which I don't know because he's not been on the team that long. But it raises the question of like, we're the Asheville Linux users group, but do we have to be? Like, are we, obviously we've had some folks like Ed who isn't quite in Asheville anymore, but we certainly welcome him. But do we care about the geographic situation of our users, or, are all welcome to join no matter where you are?
What would you call us?
We don't have to change who we are. I mean, the core will still be Asheville, but and if things drift away too far, we can consider a rebranding. But I'm just wondering because it just seems we've definitely embraced the virtual thing. Not to say we won't ever have in-person events, and not to say we don't have some notion of like locality in what we do. Like we make each other aware of what's going on, like as far as um, self and other things that are regionally interesting. But like the majority of what we do, is just meet with a bunch of people we know and talk. So it doesn't sound like we have to be limited to locals. And then certainly if another person's area is not well served with a Linux users group, yeah. So I've not yet invited this person to join us, but it's crossed my mind.
Well, Brent, we're not really limited to Asheville because I've been inviting people as well outside. Because I belong to two other groups, UCL, UG, and COLA, and I've asked those folks to join us as well from time to time in South Carolina. So, I mean, the name, I guess, really doesn't mean anything. That's just where we're located.
Yeah, and we'll always have an emotional connection to the Earth Fair days and the Firestorm days and so forth.
Well, remember that Arnold is out in outer Mongolia up there in New York State, so he's not exactly local. No offense, Arnold. Not that there's anything wrong with it. You remind me though of anybody remember Pinky and the Brain?
Yeah.
What are we going to do tomorrow, Brain? We're going to take the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to throw in there, in the open source realm, like I discovered, my wife wanted an e-bike, and she ended up with this creature, which is very similar to her other bike, which is just a um, electrified townie, which is a Trek product. But I was looking into possibilities, and one of the possibilities was to make your own, and that was a very attractive notion because I could have made something with their existing bike or with a secondhand bike and saved a fair amount of money. And one of the things I saw was one of these motors, which I don't recall the name because it's just a string of characters. Um, uh, but one of these motors has an open source firmware for it, which allows you to tweak fairly significantly what it does. So it's just interesting to see open source invade that realm, which is very much dear to my heart. I am not an e-bike guy. I have ridden quite a few in the past month or two because of this search of my wife's, and they are compelling. I could definitely see where for a lot of folks they could make commuting much more of a thing. um, and yeah, I was impressed. But yeah, it's not likely to be something where I make the leap. But yeah, it was cool
Let us know your findings because I'm interested in e-bikes too. I'd love
well,
to.
now that I've done the research, I can probably, I can talk very specific recommendations. Yeah. Um, One thing we've discovered about this guy is it's really good for what she does, and she likes the style, and she was able to put her streamers on and so forth. But this does have a very limited range in the mountains. She cannot get much past 15 miles on a real ride in these hills. There are options for that, like there's where the water bottle holder is, you could strap on an additional battery and plug it into the port there, and that'll essentially double the range because it's essentially a duplicate of the battery that's in there. So that's one thing to consider, especially in these mountains, is range can be very limited. But it does, compared to some of the other models she looked at, it does a much better job of getting her up those hills. So you know, that's another thing is you got to look at torque um, a lot more seriously than a lot of flatlanders need to, um, especially for heavier riders. So yeah, it's a lot to consider, and it's definitely something where you got to test drive everything and then decide, find what you like. You were saying something, Gene?
What did she end up going with?
She got an Electra Townie Go, and there's a lot of different Electra Townie Go's. Hers is kind of a lower end model with a rear hub motor, um, and not a lot of bling aside from that. Here, I'll give you actually a better view of the dang thing. So, but she likes the very upright, flat foot type of um, way of doing that. Oh, you're still looking so, but it's and it's actually is e-bikes go, it's fairly light because the battery is completely inside the down tube. So it's which is why it has a fairly limited range, is it's not a very big battery.
How do you replace that battery in the down tube when it fails? I mean, ultimately, it's going to die one day.
It's possible, but not easy. I forget exactly how that happens, but there is a way to access it. But
It's
it
kind of
is
like
not.
Apple.
Yeah, along those lines.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be doing it. Let's put it that way.
Now, I've got something to mention here. It's kind of strange today, guys. Have you noticed that we have gone for 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 10 seconds, and we have not lost live stream?
Is it on?
Yeah, it's running. I'm looking
That's
at it.
nice.
Yeah, it usually goes off after an hour.
Yeah, it seems to have a timer on it.
Yeah.
But
It's
yeah,
running now 2 hours, 8 minutes with live stream, it says.
cool.
Yeah.
That is nice.
Maybe that's a gift.
I thought you had jacked it, Dan.
No, I usually have to restart it.
Well,
Well-
I might see you guys.
Right. Yes, I think that pretty much does it for our meeting. So, yeah, I don't think we discussed a specific topic for next time, but let's float a few out there on the loop and see what sticks.
Okay.
All right.
Right.
Have a great one.
See you later. Right, bye.
All right.
Later.
Bye-bye.